Can you please confirm that you're able to see my screen, please?
Yes, Praveen, we can.
Okay.
Yes, Praveen, we can hear you.
Yes, Praveen.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much, sirs. So just to let you know, the session is being recorded, and we will be publishing the recording on our YouTube channel as well. So those who are not able to join us, they can still benefit from it. All right, so without further ado, let's get going into the training. We have only 1 hour within which we will touch upon a very, very interesting topic, which is cryptography. Let me quickly introduce myself. My name is Praveen Joseph. I'm a cybersecurity consultant, cybersecurity trainer with 12 plus years of overall work experience. I've been based in Dubai, working with Ingram Micro Cybersecurity, and the team itself is 3 plus years old, close to 4 years old, within which we have drastically transitioned the way in which organizations approach as well as implement cybersecurity in the region. So here's the agenda that I've got lined up for today. A very, very short introduction to ourselves. Who are we? And what are the services that we offer? I won't spend too much time here because of the subject itself. We'll jump straight away into CISSP, a quick introduction to the exam, and then we'll jump into the core topics for today, which is cryptography. So I'll start with introducing ourselves. We are Ingram Micro Cybersecurity. Ingram Micro, you may be familiar with us. We are the largest technology distributor in the world, $50 billion company with 35,000 plus employees spread in offices in close to 55 countries around the world. Our reach of the market is extremely deep, and we have access to pretty much every single area of technology that the world is working on today. In terms of cybersecurity, like I said, the team is close to 4 years old by now, and we are headquartered here in Dubai, but we have centers of excellence which have been established in Europe, in the Netherlands, as well as in Serbia, in Mexico, as well as in India and in Singapore. The primary center of excellence is from the team that I'm speaking to you from, which is headquartered right here in Dubai. We got a beautiful office in Dubai Internet City that you can see over here. We are an advanced solutions provider in cybersecurity, which means not only do we offer services, but we also develop our own products, our own innovative solutions, which is what you see over here. This is called the Cybersecurity Toolkit, consisting of solutions like Discovery, Virtual Lab, Cybergram, multi-vendor architecture. So what are each of these components? We have covered them in a webinar just last week when I spoke about these. We will be doing periodic sessions about each of these solutions as well. We have a holistic portfolio of services which cut across people, processes, as well as technologies. For people, we have trainings. For processes, we have consultancy services, managed security, as well as technical assessment services. And from a technology perspective, like I said, we are the largest technology distributor in the world. So any major cybersecurity vendor you can think of, we are already distributing their products all over the world. Okay, with that being said, we're going to jump straight into CISSP. Quick introduction to the exam. CISSP, having been in the security field for a decade, more than a decade by now, I can tell you this. It is the most respected information security certification that you can aspire to hold. It is holistic. It's normally described as being 1 inch deep, whereas 1 mile wide, which is very true because it is holistic. It touches upon every single aspect of what an information security professional would be expected to work on as part of their day-to-day operations. Not only that, it has this holistic coverage, but it does not dive deep into the different topics. The exam is very difficult. Let's be honest about this. Let's not try to sugarcoat it. It's extremely difficult, and clearing this exam is no mean feat. The exam is 3 hours long in the linear format, which is by the way not being offered in any country where the exam is being taken in English. If you're going for the older linear format, it's a 6-hour exam. But assuming we're all going to take the exam in English, the exam is 3 hours, and it is 100 to 150 questions within this 3-hour format. We need to get at least 700 out of 1000 in order to pass the exam. Now, what are the different domains within CISSP? We have 8 different domains which are called the CISSP Common Body of Knowledge, or CBK. These are the 8 domains that you see here, and this is the weightage which is given to each of these different domains. So as you can see, it's more or less equal, weighting between 10 and 15%. But the one with the highest weightage is security risk management, followed by communications and network security. Communications and network security was, for me personally, when I was studying for the exam, one of the more challenging domains to complete. Very long and little difficult as well, too technical as well, by the way. Security risk management is the exact opposite. It's not at all technical. It is very management oriented, speaks about governance, risk, compliance, policies, procedures, roles and responsibilities, etc. Now, in today's training, we are not going to talk about security risk management. We're not going to talk about communications network security. We're going to talk about security engineering. Cryptography is a module which comes within this particular domain, which is security engineering. And this is going to be our focus for today. Couple of things. Once you pass the exam, passing the exam is the tougher part. After that, the requirements are fairly straightforward. In order to get the certification, you should show that you have at least 5 years of work experience in at least 2 of those 8 domains which we just saw on the previous slide. So we need to prove 5 years of work ex. If you have a 4-year college degree, then that 5 years becomes 4 years. So undergraduation degree, if it was a 4-year degree, then no problem at all, because the 5 years will become a 4-year requirement. If we still haven't met this 4 or 5 year work experience, if we are still in the early stages of our career as an information security professional, it doesn't matter. We can work towards this experience, but in the meantime, we can hold the credential of associate of ISC Square. Apart from this, we will have to prove that we are continuously progressing, continuously learning in the information security space or cybersecurity space. How we prove this is by submitting so-called CPE points, or continued professional education points. We have to log into the ISC Square website and submit these points. Every 3 years, 120 points is the requirement to maintain your CISSP. Apart from this, there is a maintenance fee as well, annual maintenance fee, which we have to pay to ISC Square in order to keep our certificate in good standing. All right, now what are the objectives of this particular training? What are we going to cover as part of today's training? So when I was structuring this particular training and I was asking myself, how am I going to cover cryptography within 50 minutes or 55 minutes? I realized that we'll have to change the way in which we approach or derive value from today's training. When you sit for the exam, you cannot sit for the exam and say, I attended a webinar, I attended an online session on online training on cryptography. This training will not make you exam ready, let's be honest, because you need to really spend hours and hours preparing for every single of these modules that we just saw. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to introduce you to the topics. What is a bird's eye view of the topics which are included in the cryptography domain. That being said, we will look at the different topics. We'll try to understand what are the objectives of each of these topics, what is the implications of each of these topics. But I can't say that this is going to be a full-fledged deep dive session. For a full-fledged deep dive session, we hold CISSP boot camps, and CISSP is a kind of exam that definitely needs boot camps, where we will sit and we will break down every single section of the entire exam syllabus. And we will go through and analyze, perform, solve questions and answers, review case studies, sample questions, etc. Today's session, we are going to have an introduction. So you would be ideally poised to derive value if you can probably take notes from today's the points that we are discussing. But from these notes, you will have to go back to the textbook and see if you can map it to the textbook, to the contents of the textbook. It may help you to understand the contents of the textbook a lot more better. By the way, what are the textbooks that you can use? There are a lot of very good textbooks in the market. I've not included a slide on these, but just to drop a few names, the textbook by Mike Chappell is the official book. It is extremely high grade, high quality. There's also a textbook from Cybex, which is also equally good. Please check this book as well if you wish. You can go to the ISC Square website and they themselves have listed the list of recommended textbooks. You can pull out this list from here. Okay. Now, with this introduction having been established, let us start with understanding cryptography. What really is cryptography? Cryptography is the study of techniques for securely communicating messages in the presence of unauthorized third parties. So when this simple definition encompasses the entire intention of cryptography, we have a room where multiple individuals are present. How can I have a code way of communication between two individuals without the other people knowing what the messages that I have sent over between sender and recipient? So in cryptography, we have something called plain text, and then we have something called ciphertext. What is plain text? It's a clear message which anybody can read and make sense out of. Once it is passed through a process called encryption, we have something else called ciphertext. Ciphertext does not make any sense. When you look at it, it looks like a series of alphabets, special characters, and numbers. The intention of a cryptographic algorithm is to ensure that only authorized individuals can perform this reverse engineering. From the ciphertext, arrive at the plain text. Only the authorized individuals should be able to do this. This is one of the intentions of cryptography. Now, when we speak about these intentions, how can you break these down? Cryptography objectives are confidentiality, integrity, non-repudiation. Let's try to understand each of these. Confidentiality. Now, you know this, in information security or cyber security, there are three foundational pillars, which is confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So out of C, I, and A, you see C and I are the two key objectives of cryptography. The last one is non-repudiation. What is each of these? Let's try to understand. Confidentiality means only authorized people can see the data. Very simple. So in cryptography, I want to make sure that I'm transferring information to somebody else. I'm password protecting it. Just to give you a simple example, only the authorized individuals with the password can see the data. So confidentiality of the data is protected. Now, when we're talking about military communications, when you're implementing cryptographic techniques specifically for military purposes, confidentiality is a key objective because, of course, you want to keep military secrets confidential. Integrity, on the other hand, what is the objective of integrity? To ensure that files are not modified, files are not changed knowingly or unknowingly by malicious individuals. I'm happy to share my account number with you because only then can you send me the money that I'm asking you for. You can transfer the fund transfer, you can perform the fund transfer to me. So you can see the account number, but you should not change the account number. This is what integrity is all about. In cryptography, I need to make sure that files are not modified. How do I do this? The answer is hashing. What is hashing? We will talk about it. Hashing is also a key component of cryptography. The last objective of cryptography is non-repudiation. What is non-repudiation? The textbook definition, I'll tell you this. The creation of an undeniable association between a subject as well as its actions on an object. Very simple. What do I mean by this? If, for example, an administrator has logged into a firewall and he or she has made some changes, tomorrow he or she, they should not be able to deny and say, no, I didn't make those changes. This is what non-repudiation is all about. Because you have these logs, you can prove from the logs that only the person who has that particular user ID, which is hopefully the administrator, only he or she could have carried out these particular actions. Okay, so non-repudiation is one of the core objectives of cryptography. I will just mute all, but let me remind you, ladies and gentlemen, if you wish to speak, feel free to unmute yourself. Please, if you have questions, comments at any point, I failed to tell you this earlier today, feel free to type them into the chat window. Feel free to speak at any point of time. Now, coming back, cryptography will help you to link actions to individuals because you have something called keys, encryption keys. Only authorized individuals are expected to have those keys. So when an action is associated with the key, you can be sure that only those people have done this action because only they are supposed to have the key. So you can bind the identity of sender or creator to the transaction or the associated data. Some simple definitions that we need to understand. What is a key? What is a cipher? What is a crypto system, etc.? We're going to cover this right now. A cipher is nothing but an encryption algorithm. It's a mathematical function such that when you pass the input to it, it is able to generate an output. When you pass the plain text, which you see over here, when you pass the plain text to it, it is able to generate the output, which is a ciphertext. Now, the more stronger the algorithm or the more complex it is, the more difficult it is going to be to reverse engineer or to crack this particular algorithm, right? So generally speaking, Algorithms are publicly available information. You can create an encryption algorithm, you can create a cipher, and you can publish it. You should publish it, in fact. The key is what is going to be kept confidential. Generally, in symmetric or asymmetric encryption, the algorithm is accompanied by an encryption key. Let me try to very, very simply put this. Everybody knows how a lock mechanism actually works. The simple padlock that you put on your door. Everybody knows how this lock is going to work. Anybody can crack it open and see how it works. And there are so many videos which explain this, by the way. It is a key which is going to have to be kept confidential. For every lock, you have a unique key, but the way in which the lock functions is the same. Similarly, the encryption algorithm or the cipher is a publicly available mechanism or a mathematical function. Anybody can take it, anybody can work around it. But the keys are what you need to protect in order to ensure these three objectives that we saw earlier: confidentiality, integrity, as well as non-repudiation. Okay. The next one is the key itself. So you have the cipher. When you link it with a key, that is when the strength of that cipher is maximized. You have an algorithm, like I said earlier, you have the cipher or the algorithm, it will be published. But the key is what you have to keep confidential. It has to be known only to the authorized individuals. Okay, you can use different keys with the same algorithm in order to produce different ciphertext. Now there's something called key clustering, there is something called collusion, or collision rather, sorry. There is something called collision and there is something called key clustering as well. These are definitions that you will see in your textbook. I'm not going to jump into these details for today's session. What is a crypto system? The actual mechanism, the actual ecosystem or machinery that is developed in order to implement a cryptographic process is what we call a crypto system. The crypto systems, they will implement ciphers in order to encrypt or to decrypt sensitive information. Now, crypto systems in the early days, they used to be mechanical in nature. We will talk about this very briefly. They used to be mechanical, but today they are more computerized, as we are very well aware. In future, they are going to be based on quantum cryptography itself. What you see over here is one of the famous crypto systems, the Enigma machine. It was used in World War II by the Germans in order to encrypt their communications. It in fact changed the course of the war when the US and Great Britain were able to crack or reverse engineer this particular crypto system. If you see the movie, The Imitation Game, starring Benedict Cumberbatch, you will learn more about the Enigma machine, a very popular crypto system which was used by the Germans for encrypting their communications during World War II. Now, some other definitions you need to know. The study of crypto systems with the intent of reverse engineering or with the intent of cracking them is what we call cryptanalysis. And the time that you take in order to crack a crypto system is what we call the work factor. Okay, so these simple definitions we need to keep in mind. There's also another concept which we need to know, which is what we call steganography. What is steganography? Steganography is a mechanism of cryptography where you are able to hide in plain sight, to put it in very simple terms. In encryption, we know the data exists, but we can't even see it. In steganography, on the other hand, we don't even know that there is a hidden message which is being shared between a sender and a receiver. It is hiding in plain sight. Let me give you the simple example. I want to send a secret message to my friend. I know that this message is going to be read by other people. So what can I do? I will hide my secret message in a bogus message, in a dummy message, so to speak. I will send him a picture, which is a vessel image. In this picture, there are two dice. I know that people are going to open this picture and see it before my target recipient opens it. But what I will do is I will hide within the pixels of this image. I will hide my secret message. So anybody who sees the picture, unless they know which specific pixels to look at, they will not know that there is a secret message hidden within this image. Only my target recipient, he knows which pixels to look for. He knows the key, and he will be able to decrypt the secret message by extracting the data that is represented on those respective pixels. This is one of the best ways of implementing so-called steganography. You send messages between between sender and recipient. Everybody is able to see this, but they don't know that there is a secret message hidden in it. Some other principles that we need to know of are what we call substitution as well as transposition. Substitution is also called confusion. In the earlier primitive or rudimentary mechanisms of cryptography implementation, substitution was more than enough to provide ample secrecy for your messages. How does substitution work? Let's assume your plain text message is bottle. How do you get the ciphertext from here? The simple key that you have is you're going to add +3 to every single letter in the plain text. So B plus 3 is B, C, D, E. O plus 3 is O, P, Q as well as R. T plus 3 is W, T plus 3 is W, and so on. Substitution by itself is not enough to provide adequate secrecy in today's case. What we will do is, you will see this in the upcoming slides, we will couple it with other cryptographic mechanisms. So in this way, you will increase the complexity, or you will increase the work factor, the time that is taken to crack your algorithm, your cipher. Another concept that we should be familiar with is so-called transposition or permutation. It's also called diffusion, by the way. Let's try to understand. We have the same plain text, which is bottle. Every single letter can be serialized, given a serial number. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, 6. Now you will define your transposition rule, which is a random number over here. 5, 4, 2, 6, 1, 3. So the ciphertext will become character number 5, which is L. Character number 4, which is T. Character number 2, which is O, and so on and so forth. So by changing this particular transposition rule, you can alter what the ciphertext is going to be. So this is the key. This is essentially the cipher, the key itself for the cipher. Now, how have ciphers evolved over the years? In the early days, we had simple manual ciphers. Okay, this transposition cipher that I spoke of just now, this was in fact very commonly used in ancient Sparta. So what we used to do, what they used to do essentially was, first of all, we have to remember not everybody back in the day could actually read. So the skill of being literate was something which was very limited. Now, how do you send a message from one person to the other and ensure that only this person is able to read it? You take a long scroll, you wrap it around a rod. Once you have wrapped it tightly, you write the message on it. Now, when you unwrap it, what you have is a scroll which looks like this, and it has only random letters on it. Unless you have the same rod with the same thickness, the same length and diameter, you cannot decrypt it. This was a simple transposition cipher, with the key being the length, the diameter of the rod itself, back in the early days. So this was early or manual ciphers. After that, we had the mechanical era, where you had mechanical ciphers like the Enigma machine that we just spoke of 2 slides back. Today we have applications, software applications. As end users, we don't need to know what is happening in the background, but they are able to deploy very complex encryption algorithms within a matter of seconds or even faster than that. What does the future hold? Quantum cryptography is where we are looking, where we see the field is eventually transitioning towards or moving towards. Quantum cryptography is the science of measuring light particles as they pass through a specific device, almost impossible to crack. Okay, now what is quantum cryptography? What are the different parts of this particular subject? You don't need to worry, it is not included in detail as part of your CISSP syllabus. Now, there are 2 types of ciphers that I need to explain to you. The first one is what we call stream ciphers, and the second one is what we call block ciphers. What is a stream cipher? In a stream cipher, you're going to encrypt every single bit of your plain text 1 bit at a time. So you have something called a key stream generator. What this key stream generator does is it generates a random series of 1s and 0s. Okay. This random series of 1s and 0s will be XORed with the plain text 1 bit at a time. What is XOR? XOR is a mathematical function which you see over here. When the two bits are the same, the output will be the same. The output will be 0. When the two bits are different, the output is going to be 1. So for 0 and 0, you get 0. For 1 and 1, you get 0. But when the two bits are different, you're going to get the output as 1. So very simple mechanism. You simply XOR every bit of the plain text with the random series of ones and zeros that you're going to generate using so-called key stream generator. You should ensure that this key stream is random. There should not be any repetitive patterns present within the key stream. Simple example of a stream cipher is RC4. Block cipher, on the other hand, is slightly different from stream cipher. It's a lot more secure, but it takes a lot more time. What we do over here is you will take the data input, the input data, and you break it into blocks. Each block will have a fixed length. Maybe it is 64 bits, maybe it is 128 bits, but each of the blocks has a fixed length. It is important that they have a fixed length because what you do here is for every single block, you will encrypt it one by one with the key stream generators. So consider this block cipher and you can couple it with confusion as well as diffusion, that is substitution as well as transposition that we just saw on the previous slide. This will make it a lot more difficult to crack. Not only that, you can also use chaining. What I do over here is I have an input which is the earth is round. I will break it into blocks. The earth is round. Let's say each of these blocks is 64 bits long. Now, each block will be encrypted with the cipher, through the cipher. Let's say it's an XOR function itself, and it is going to come out with a random series of ones and zeros. The output of each block will serve as an input to the next block. Not only that, we will also include the functions of confusion as well as diffusion based on predefined keys or ciphers. This way you can increase the complexity of your entire algorithm. All the simple fundamental building blocks that we saw earlier, we can mix them together. You can make it a lot more complex, a lot more difficult to crack. Speaking of cracking, you should remember that all crypto systems will eventually outlive their usefulness. It's just a matter of time before every single cryptographic system out there is actually cracked. Some examples, DES, which is one of the very popular symmetric encryption algorithms, was cracked. It was cracked in just 4.5 days. Wireless equivalency protocol, WEP, very, very popularly used in the early days, but you know this for sure now. It is no longer considered secure. It is no longer advisable to use WEP encryption for your wireless networks because it can be very easily cracked using simple tools. These tools, by the way, are available in Kali Linux in your Kali Linux distribution. Also, the 4096-bit RSA encryption algorithm was also successfully broken using so-called what we call a side channel attack. There are different types of cryptographic attacks: side channel attack, birthday attacks, dictionary attack, replay attack, etc. Okay, in side channel attack, what we'll do is we will try to identify what are the emanations, vibrations that are produced within a cryptographic system. So by detecting acoustic variations in the CPU sound itself, by detecting, calculating as well as analyzing the data, collecting as well as analyzing these acoustic vibrations, patterns will be sought out. What are the repetitive patterns? By identifying these patterns, we can try and reverse engineer the entire algorithm itself. It's a lot harder than I'm just making it look like. But a 4096-bit RSA encryption algorithm was also successfully cracked using this mechanism, side channel attack. Now, when you're doing this sort of cryptographic analysis or so-called cryptanalysis methodologies, there are different ways of classifying your situation. You might have only the ciphertext available with you. You might have only the plain text available with you. So based on your particular situation, assuming you are the individual who's trying to crack a cryptographic system, a crypto system, we have 4 categories: ciphertext only, known plaintext, chosen ciphertext. In all of these categories, your objective is find the key. Okay, we want to find what is the key. We know the algorithm already. We need to identify what is the key that was used to encrypt a particular piece of plain text. In all the cases, the cipher is of course available to you because the cipher is made public. Like I said earlier, the cipher will be published. The key is what we need to determine. Okay, so these are straightforward. Now, whether you have the plain text and the ciphertext and / or the ciphertext, this is what will be changing. According to these variables, you have these 4 categories, and you will see these categories very clearly explained in your textbook, by the way. Ciphertext only, known plain text, chosen plain text, and chosen ciphertext. So in ciphertext only, like you can imagine, yes, you only have the ciphertext, you don't have the plain text. In known plain text, you have a part of the plain text available to you. In chosen plain text, you can select a particular part of the plain text and try to analyze it. In chosen ciphertext, you can select a section of the ciphertext and you can try to analyze it. In all the cases, please remember the ciphertext is also available to you. Okay, so your objective is to identify the key itself. So based on the different situations of the researcher, the person who is trying to analyze a crypto system, we have these different cryptanalysis methodologies, and you'll see these explained probably over 1 or 2 pages in your textbook. Now, what are encryption-based attacks? There are different kinds of attacks. Okay, what I've included here are simply 3 attacks. The 4th one is side channel attack, which I described on the earlier slide. I have not included here on this particular slide. Just to keep ensure that we're sticking to our timelines, I'm going to speak about these 3 attacks. The first one is birthday attack. Let me ask you a simple probabilistic question. Assume that you have access to a large hall. Now, this scenario will work only in the pre-COVID-19 times. So let's take it to the virtual world. Assume you have a Microsoft Teams meeting and you're going to invite a random number of people to this particular meeting. How many individuals should you invite such that at least one of them has the same date of birth as you? This is a question that you need to ask. The answer has been determined probabilistically, and it is 253. You need to invite 253 individuals to a room, virtual or physical, such that at least one of them has the same date of birth as you. Only when you have invited 253 people can at least one of them have the same DOB. Now let's try to simplify this. How many people should you invite such that any 2 people have the same date of birth? Ask yourself this question. This is a lot easier to achieve. Instead of trying to achieve your birthday, your date of birth, what you're trying to do is you're going to try and ensure that at least 2 people, any 2 random people have the same date of birth. You will see that the number will come down to just 10%. Earlier it was 253, now it is just 21. Just 21 people you invite randomly, the probability of at least 2 of them having the same date of birth is 100%. Now this probabilistic question that I asked you is the building block of the birthday attack. What is a birthday attack? How does it work? Now, earlier today I told you there is something called collision. What is collision? I will explain it to you in one of the upcoming slides. But in the birthday attack, what we'll try to do is, as an attacker, you will try to consistently keep making changes to a document such that the output value is what you are expecting to have. Let me try to explain. You have a file which has the contents, the earth is round. This is the content of this particular file. Now this file has been hashed and your hash value is 123. Simple. Now you have opened this file and you're going to make a change. You're going to say the earth is flat. Now you don't want anybody to know that you have made this change. So what are you going to do? You will have to ensure that that same hash value, which was 123, you're getting the same hash value when you're passing the function through the same hash function. How can you do this? Instead of saying the earth is flat, you can say the earth is flat full stop. You can say the earth is flat with F caps, with T caps. You will have to keep on changing the input value multiple times until you get that same hash value, which is 123. By playing around with the hash function, you will try to achieve the same hash value, which is 123. When the recipient sees the hash value, he will see that it is the same as the original one. He will read it and he will think the earth is actually flat. This is a simple example of what we call a birthday attack. This is the reason we call it the birthday attack, because it's based on the principle that you're going to try and change the input such that you get the desired output. The dictionary attack is also based on probabilities. What you try to do here is you will try to guess the password by comparing that encrypted password against a predetermined list of probable password values. So I have the ciphertext. I need to now get the plain text. What is your password? Your password is probably welcome123. The ciphertext of this password is ABC, let's say. I know for a fact that ABC is a ciphertext that you get when you're passing the password welcome123 through a particular encryption algorithm. I already have the encryption algorithm. Simply by looking at the ciphertext, I know that your password is welcome123. This is a dictionary attack. When you're using common words like welcome, like admin, like user123, etc., the ciphertext is already very well known by the attackers. They will simply try to guess the password by looking at the ciphertext. I have your ciphertext. I know the cipher that you're using the algorithm. It's very easy for me to try and guess your password. This is dictionary attack. This is why we say don't use commonly used words, don't use dictionary words basically, and try to make your password more complex, more special characters, more numbers, make it more difficult for attackers to guess. The last category of attack that we're going to look at on this slide is replay attack. In a replay attack, I have the ciphertext. If I can authenticate myself with the ciphertext of your password, I don't even need your cleartext password. This is what a replay attack is. I will try to replay the traffic that flows between a user and an authentication server. I have the entire traffic which flows between the user when he is typing a password to a server to authenticate himself. Maybe it's a radio server, maybe it's Takax Diameter, whatever it is. When I have this traffic, it is probably fully encrypted. I don't have his password, but can I authenticate myself with the encrypted version of the password itself? This is what the replay attack is all about. By replaying the authentication flow between the user and the authentication server without having the cleartext password itself. So these are some of the encryption based attacks, ladies and gentlemen. Like I said, your questions are always welcome. Please keep them coming. Now, cryptography has three categories: hashing, symmetric, as well as asymmetric. I mentioned hashing when I was talking about the birthday attack. When I was describing the birthday attack, I mentioned hashing. I will explain hashing to you. A hash function is such that when it's a mathematical function, by the way, it's a mathematical function such that when you pass an input value to it, the output will always have the same length. No matter whether you're putting a 3 GB movie file or you're putting a 64 KB notepad file into it, the output will always have a fixed length. It doesn't change. This is the functionality of the hash function. Another property: if there is even one small change in the input, the output is going to be completely different. This is why I said you will play around with that earth is flat sentence. You can make it capital letter F, you can make it add a full stop at the end. The output is going to be drastically different. Your objective in a birthday attack is to get the same output, right? There are a third function of a hash function. It is a one-way function. Once you have the hash value, you cannot get the input from it. It's mathematically impossible. There is no way to reverse the encryption that has gone into a hash function. Some examples of hash functions are SHA-1, SHA-2, etc., as well as MD5. Okay. There are no keys in hashing, by the way. That's the reason I've broken it down for you here. You have 0 keys in hashing. But in symmetric key cryptography as well as asymmetric key cryptography, you definitely have keys, and symmetric encryption has 1 key, asymmetric has 2 keys. What is symmetric cryptography? Very simple. I've taken an Excel file, I have encrypted it with a password. I send you the file, I send you the password in a separate email. We do this so often in our day-to-day work activities. Praveen, I'm going to send you the password over SMS. I'm going to send you the password on WhatsApp. Eventually, what we're doing here is simple symmetric key cryptography. There is only one key. And if you share this key with the recipient, he can decrypt it. Okay. In an asymmetric key cryptography, it's a little more difficult. It's a little more difficult and a little more complex because there are 2 keys. Why did we come out with asymmetric key cryptography? Very simple. In symmetric key cryptography, I have encrypted it with a strong password, but the problem is I need to share the password with my recipient, with my recipient. When I'm sharing it, of course, this is a weakness. Someone else can crack the password. Someone else can get the password and use it or misuse it. How do I securely distribute the password? This is a question that we are trying to address with asymmetric key cryptography. For this reason, there are two keys in asymmetric encryption. One key is called the public key and the other one is called the private key, like you see in this particular sentence over here. So how does asymmetric key cryptography work? We'll talk about this on the next few slides, okay? In an asymmetric key cryptography, the public key is something that I can share with the outside world. You can have access to my public key. If you want to communicate with me, first of all, download that public key, and whatever message you're going to send me, encrypt it with that public key. Anybody can encrypt with the public key, doesn't matter. But only the person who has the private key can decrypt it. I'll explain this as we go down, okay? So here's an example of how, here's a depiction of how symmetric encryption works. Very simple, very fast and efficient. The secure key exchange is a challenge. This is what I told you. I can send you the password on SMS, on WhatsApp or whatever it is, or a separate email, but it is always risky, right? So I encrypt the data, I send it over to my recipient, and the recipient also gets the same key, and they're able to decrypt it. Examples are DES, triple DES, blowfish, twofish, etc. Now, when we talk about DES, which is one of the most popular symmetric key cryptographies or symmetric encryption algorithms, there are different modes of DES. Now, for the lack of time, I have summarized everything into one simple slide over here. We spoke about block cipher, we spoke about stream ciphers on the earlier slide today.
1-0 is out. 2-1.
Okay, I will request you, ladies and gentlemen, please to be on mute. And if you have any questions, of course, feel free to unmute yourselves. Feel free to unmute yourself as well as to speak. And if there are any questions, yes, please keep them coming. Okay, no problem. cs@it-serve.com. No problem. The recording will be made available on YouTube. Now, there are different DES modes, like I was telling you.
Hello, Praveen.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you. You have given some information about the hashing, like MD5 and SHA-1 and SHA-2. I think SHA 256 or 512 is more secure. But I need to understand that what is the difference between hashing and salt, and why salt has been used for more security, the hashing.
Okay. Thank you so much, sir. Your name Saurabh Kumar. Okay, Saurabh,
Yes.
thank you so much, Saurabh. So
Thank you.
salt, don't worry, it's a very great question. It's a very great question, and I'm going to cover salt in as part of, I think, 2 or 3 slides from now. I will explain salt to you. It's
Thank you.
it's an add-on for hashing. I will explain it to you very quickly. No problem. So when we talk about DES modes, there are different DES modes, which you see over here. There are 5 of them: ECB, CBC, CFB, OFB, and CTR mode. What are the different types of these modes? Block, stream. Do we add something called IV? Yes or no? There are different variations. What is IV? It's called initialization vector. And in fact, the question which Mr. Saurabh Kumar asked us just now, SALT, is very similar to initialization vector. What is initialization vector? I will explain that as well to you. I have a slide on IV as well today, so don't worry about this. I will recommend you take a note of this particular table because this will help you to understand this entire section a lot easier. Block, stream. By the way, you will see the similar tables in your textbooks. This is not something which is new. You will see these tables, but it will really help you to understand this particular section. So is it a block or a stream cipher? We spoke about this earlier. ECB as well as CBC, yes, they are block ciphers. In CBC, you will add an initialization vector. And in fact, you will do this on all the modes except for ECB. And there is a possibility of error propagation. Why? Because of the so-called concept of chaining, which we spoke about earlier today. Chaining is when the output of one block will become the input of the subsequent block. They become chained together. Okay, I'm not going to go into these domains today, guys. I want you to know what these are, and I want you to please check in the textbook because I don't have the time to go into these details today. Now, we spoke about symmetric, coming back, we spoke about symmetric encryption. We saw that there is some examples of DES, triple DES, etc. We saw that there are different DES modes, and I'm again emphasizing this part is very important for you. So please review this from the textbook. I'm only summarizing it over here. The next one is asymmetric encryption. In asymmetric encryption, like I said, we have 2 keys. We have a public key and we have a private key. Both these keys have some sort of mathematical relationship between each other. I cannot randomly select two keys and say, hey, this is a public and this is a private key. No, they have to be related to each other through a mathematical function. Now here's how it works. Suppose I want to send a file to a recipient. Let's say Jake. Okay, Jake wants to send a file over to Anne. First thing that Jake does is he will create this public and private key pair. So this key pair has to be generated. Okay, the public key, he is going to send it over to Anne. Anne now has a public key. Now this is a public key, anybody can have it, it's no problem at all. Now what she will do, Anne will take the message and she will encrypt it with the public key. But here's the beauty. Anybody with the public key, if they try to decrypt it, it's not going to work. It will only work with Jake because you need the private key. Only Jake has that private key. So she will encrypt the message with the public key, send it back to Jake. Since Jake has a private key, very straightforward, he can decrypt it. There is no transmission of the public key whatsoever. Simple examples, ECC, Diffie-Hellman, RSA, etc. Now comes the question which Mr. Saurabh Kumar had asked us about, which is hashing as well as salting. We'll talk about this. In fact, salt comes, yes, on the very next slide. We'll talk about this very quickly today. Now, what is hashing? Assume that I want to send a file to you. Because I don't have a reliable connection between my computer and your computer, I need to make sure that you are getting the file in its entirety without any corruption. The contents of the file should be not altered on the way, should be unaltered. You should get the file without any integrity being modified. If you remember, in the very second slide of today, we saw that the objective of cryptography is integrity, confidentiality, integrity, and non-repudiation. Hashing is where you're going to apply integrity. Very simple. What I will do is I will rely on a hash function. I take my file and I pass it through a hash function. What is the properties of this hash function? If there is even one change to the input, the output is going to be completely different. Not only that, from the output, you can never ever get the input. It's a one-way function. Okay, so let's take the simple example here. Hashing is a one-way function. Input can have a variable length, but the output will always be the same fixed length. If there's even one change to the input, you have a completely different output. Now, Jake wants to send a message over to Anne, or I want to send my file over to you, as giving the example. What I will do is I will take that message and I will pass it through the hash value. Sorry, I will pass it to the hash function and I will generate a hash value. This hash value, I will append it with my message and I will send you the message as well as the hash value. What will the recipient do, which is in this case Anne? Anne will take the file that she has received. She will pass it through that same hash function. She will now compare her output hash value with the hash value that I sent her. If they both match, it means that the file has not been corrupted. If there's even one small change to the file, the hash values, there is no way they will match. If they match, we have something called a collision. This is a problem with the hash function. When there are two different outputs, but they're producing the same, when there are two different inputs, but they're producing the same output. Your input is the earth is round, and then another input is the earth is flat. Both of these files are giving you the same output. You have a collision. This is exactly what you're trying to do in a birthday attack that I spoke of earlier today. You're trying to change the input such that you're getting the desired output. Ideally, collision should not be there. Let me also call out, ladies and gentlemen, do not get confused between collision and collusion. You will see this collusion word as well in your CISSP, COLLUSION. This comes in a different module, identity and access management, where we talk about separation of duties. When two individuals collude with each other, you know the word collude anyway, so it's very easy to straighten out collusion and collision. When two people are colluding with each other to carry out a fraud, separation of duties is defeated. Collision here is totally different when two inputs are producing the same output, which is a hash function. In fact, in the CISSP textbooks, you will see a side note which tells you, please do not confuse collision with collusion. So I just thought it's interesting and I'll tell you this right now. Okay, Now comes the question which Mr. Kumar Saurabh had asked us about, which is salting the hash. Now, I told you this collision is a problem when two different inputs are producing the same output. This is a problem because the hash function is not random enough. In order to increase the randomness, what we do is you have the message which you're passing through the hash function. Okay. Not only that, you can add something called salt. A salt is a random number which is added to the input of the hashing function to create unique hash values. If you remember in the early slide today, we spoke about stream ciphers. We spoke about key stream generators. Key stream generators will keep on generating random series of ones and zeros. We also spoke of initialization vector when we spoke about the des modes. All of these are the same concept as salt. In salt, you have a random series of ones and zeros. It's like adding salt to your food. Just add these ones and zeros to the as well to the input file. Add the salt to your password, for example, pass it through the hash function. So your password is welcome123 plus salt. Salt now is some random series of ones and zeros. Since you're complicating the input, the hash function is going to give you a very, very random output, which is your hash. It's going to make it more secure. It's going to make it more difficult for someone to identify your input from the hash function. It's going to be more difficult to reverse engineer the hash function. This is the objective of salting, Mr. Saurabh Kumar. I hope this helps, as well as everybody in this room.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Similar to salt is what we have that you see over this particular slide, what we call initialization vectors. Specific method of salting encryption algorithms. A random series of ones and zeros will be used along with the keys, will be used along with the input values and fed into an encryption algorithm in order to reduce the likelihood of identical ciphertext or identical output being created from identical clear text or similar clear text. Okay, so with key, when your plain text is bottle, your encryption is always going to be this one. But if you add the key and you also add an initialization vector to it, your output is going to be random. You're going to increase the randomness of the cipher as well as the strength of your entire crypto system by adding these random values, initialization vectors or salt. The last part of what we're going to cover today is public key infrastructure or PKI. The next time you visit www.gmail.com or facebook.com, just click on the lock sign that you see on the address bar, and you will, when you click on the lock, you will see that this certificate was issued by a company called Veritrust or VeriSign, TrustWave, whatever it is. When you dig deeper, you will understand that you are actually impinging on the world of PKI, public key infrastructure. A PKI is a governance framework to ensure confidentiality, integrity, and non-repudiation between individuals in an ecosystem. CI and non-repudiation, these are the three objectives of cryptography. How do you implement these within an ecosystem? This is what public key infrastructure is all about. PKI. Okay, so in a PKI, you have different entities. You have a root certification authority. You can have subordinate certification authorities or subordinate CAs. These entities will be offering signed certificates, which are an attestation of the identity of individuals, entities, websites, IP addresses, whatever it is. When someone wants to connect to this particular individual entity or website, they only need to check this digital certificate and they can be certain that they are speaking to a verified, authenticated entity. Who are these individuals or who are the components in a public key infrastructure entity? You have someone called the certificate authority. The certificate authority is responsible for issuing the certificates. You have someone called the registration authority. The registration authority is one tier below the certification authority. They are not responsible, they are not eligible to issue the certificates, but they are something like a broker between the customers as well as the certification authorities. The digital certificates are what the certification authority will actually issue to an entity, and that is an attestation of their legitimacy. You have a database of all the valid certified entities, certified individuals, as well as the certificates that they hold, the digital certificates that they hold. Anybody can visit this particular database to verify the authenticity of an entity on this environment itself. Lastly, you have a certificate management system, which is responsible for keeping all the certificates updated, keeping the database updated as well. Now, what is a process of a PKI ecosystem or a transaction in a PKI based ecosystem? Jake will first ask the certification authority to provide him with a digital certificate. His identity is already registered with a registration authority. So the CA will verify with the registration authority, is this Jake whom he claims to be? If yes, if everything checks out, he will be getting a certificate. Now Jake can ask his customers to check the certificate to verify that yes, he is only Jake. This is exactly how Facebook, Gmail, or whoever it is, they are having the digital certificates. Now, when Anne as a customer wants to connect to Jake, she does not know who he is. So Jake will give him his certificate, which is a proof of his legitimate identity, as well as the confidentiality of the connection between him as well as Jake, as well as Anne. Since Anne does not know Jake, she will ask the certification authority to verify his identity. The CA will now check the certificate and tell Anne that it is a valid certificate. She can now trust Jake. This is a simple flow for authentication, non-repudiation in a PKI process. Ladies and gentlemen, this brings me to the close of today's training on cryptography. The time is 2:59 on the dot.
Sir, I have one query related to
Yes,
PKI.
sir. Yes, sir.
Sir, related to the web certificate which user can able to access a web console, either Facebook or Gmail or any other website. What is the role of public key and private key there? I want to understand the public key, private key flow when the customer or the user is accessing the certificate from CA. In the certificate, the public key is binding there. So I need to understand the public key, private key flows here. So if you have any PPT.
Okay, understood. So sort of, yes. So this is a deep session that we have to do on PKI itself. The flow on public key and private key. Yes, this is I have the material, and we have a detailed session on PKI as well, where we cover this normally. What I will do, I will share some material with you where this workflow is explained. Let me try to put that together for you, and I will share it with you. In fact, I'll share it with all the people in the group as well. This might be useful for everybody.
Thank you, sir.
No problem, Saurabh. Any other questions, ladies and gentlemen? Please let me know. Okay, so if you have questions, feel free to type them as I speak right now. Let me take a few seconds to thank you once again for joining us today, for being with us throughout the training. On behalf of Ingram Micro Cybersecurity, I hope you really enjoyed the training. Like I said, this training was designed to be an eye-opener for you because CISSP is a deep subject. Like I said, it's an inch mile and a mile wide, but it takes a lot of commitment from each of us to successfully clear the exam. I am doing CISSP trainings as part of the Ingram Micro Cybersecurity offerings. We do trainings for individuals such as yourselves. These are 5-day boot camps, 15-day boot camps. We have different flavors. So let me know what you prefer, and we can definitely get in touch and have a full-fledged session as well. Exam tips, how to prepare for the exam. These are things that I can speak about as well with you. I gave the exam in 2012, and since then I've been actively training as well as supporting individuals who are pursuing the exam. So I'm very happy to support you as well if you wish to sit the exam. And that's pretty much it from my side. So thank you so much for joining. I hope you have an excellent rest of the day, and take care and stay safe, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Praveen.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.